So it's our spooky episode, guys. One question I have for you: do you guys like candy corn?
Oh, I do not. I actually quite dislike it.
I actually very much do like it. Although I think it's strange that I like it because isn't one of the main ingredients of candy corn honey? Is that accurate?
I think so.
Am I making that up? Okay, good.
I don't know.
Good. I hope it is. Because I'm not a honey person. Like, I don't put honey on biscuits, but I do like candy corn. So what does that say about me?
Candy corn, isn't it just like 90% wax though? Like it's like the wax bottles, but more edible.
It to me, it falls into this specific subgenre of food that feels like there's no edible components to it, but you can still eat it. Like I feel like I'm eating like industrial material and chemicals, and there's not anything natural.
Come on. It's like a nougat. It's like a nougat or something.
Oh yeah,
that's
a natural nougat, like you'd find out, out in Mother Nature.
Yeah, in a berry bush, in a nougat bush.
Yeah.
It's like a root. It grows out of the ground, right? You just pick your nougat and you clean it
nougat,
off like a potato or something.
Pop one in your mouth. Mm-hmm.
I will say, candy corn, like there's certain candy that when it gets a little bit old, obviously most candy when it gets a little bit old starts to get less edible, but candy corn specifically, once it gets a little old and starts to get hard, that's a pass for me. I remember my grandma always having a dish of candy corn out in the fall or October.
It's like
whatever.
always sticky, like they're all stick together in like a cluster because they've been just sitting out.
This candy corn was good for 2 days, Grandma, and it has been 3 weeks since you put it in this dish. And I feel like I'm probably the only one eating it. But
kind of gets the jelly bean thing where it develops almost like kind of a hard casing, and it like it almost flakes in your mouth like it's paint chipping.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yep.
I'm not about that life.
I do like candy corn. I was just housing a bag of it that I just got from Target before we started on here. The thing I realized about it though is I don't like any weird flavor candy corn. They like go, oh, here's Nerds candy corn, or like, here's whatever. I don't want anything else besides just that regular candy corn taste. Don't add anything weird to it. So
yeah, I think I would agree with you there, although I can't say that I've ever had a different flavor of candy corn other than the normal. I have had like the candy corn pumpkins, but they just basically taste like candy corn.
Yeah, they're just like denser. Yeah.
Yeah. Yep.
Yeah. They come out with all sorts of ones. They have a trolley one, like the trolley worms, and it's like sour coated. Yeah. I tried those one year. No, pass.
Yeah, I would not.
That I could get down with.
You
now you're
so?
starting to speak my language.
That's my candy corn.
Let's go.
Well, speaking of candy corn, this is IndieQuest, the celebration of the indie and obscure. We're here to talk about indie games, particularly spooky video games. This episode, my name is Josh. I'm one of your hosts, joined by one of my co-hosts, Steve. How are you doing?
I'm doing pretty fantastic. It's a almost unseasonably warm fall October day out there, and I'm going to get to talk to my bros about some video games. So, 2 thumbs up.
Awesome, and I'm also joined by the captain himself, Captain Drachma. How's it going, Seth?
I am doing well, and I was enjoying that unseasonably warm weather today. It was about 77 today. I mowed a couple lawns and listened to a podcast or two. So
nice.
It's pretty nice, but glad to wind it down and out with you guys.
Yeah. We had one cold day so far. Like it was below 40s here for like a one night. That was it. And I realized that the new place does not stay warm at all. We were like shivering. We're like, okay, it's time to get some space heaters in here, or utilize some of these floor heater things, which are mostly all covered up with furniture, unfortunately. But hey, it is what it is. Yep.
Yeah, this is the same at our house too.
Yeah, you just start like moving in. You just put a dresser in front of it, a shelf, whatever, and you're like, well, I can't use that one anymore, so let's just get little space heaters just for the season, I guess.
On my shelf behind me that has all my Nintendo DS games, there's a block of them that I've removed on the bottom shelf because that's where the heat register is, and it blows heat through that little tiny gap into the room. It makes my room always smell like Nintendo DS games. It's quite nice.
How else would you ever want your room to smell? I mean,
Get that
exactly.
ambiance going there. Yeah.
it's the perfect air freshener. I might start hanging a Nintendo DS game from my rearview mirror in my car.
There you go.
Yeah. I just want to give everybody a reminder that on November 16th at noon Eastern Time, we're doing a live IndieQuest to kick off the charity stream, which is going to benefit International Association for Suicide Prevention. So we're super stoked for that. We are going to pretty much do a regular episode of the show and then hang out and talk with Chad at the end of the show. So should be a good time.
It's also only like 2 episodes away, which is weird. That's coming up fast.
Yeah, it doesn't feel like it is. Yeah.
I feel like I'm not ready, but at the same time, I'm excited. So we'll see. We'll see how it goes.
Well, one thing we've done in the past for like these Halloween, it should be titled Halloween Spooktacular 2024 because that's a title I came up with originally. But what we did on, I think the first couple of these is we did something called Pitch Your Own Horror Indie Game. And what we do is we each come up with a concept, possibly a developer we want to make the game, art style, music, all the fun stuff. So who wants to pitch their game first today?
I can go first.
Okay.
I don't mind. All right, so it's got to be a horror game, right? And I'm thinking to myself, what's the most body horror thing out there? What's the most intensely unpleasant thing to view? And that is on the cover of an Animorphs book, that middle transformation where they're like half shark, half human, and everything is distorted and gross. So here's my pitch. Animorphs themed horror game takes place in a zoo. So you're wandering around, most of the people are gone, most of the animals are gone or killed. So there's not a lot of opportunities for you to find Animorph transformations, but you navigate around, you're finding some hidden areas, some secret items and stuff, and every so often you come across either a caged up animal that gives you a new transformation power that lets you access new areas, or later on in the game you find out that whoever's been running this zoo or using this zoo as a cover has been doing experiments, and you start finding mutated versions of animals or spliced versions of animals with 2 sets of DNA, and you get those as your Animorph transformations for the late game areas. Try to tell me that wouldn't be the sickest game you've ever played.
That would be really sick.
Yeah, I'm already pumped about it. And plus, Goosebumps can't gobble up all the horror from my childhood. We gotta get Animorphs in there too.
Definitely.
I just wonder if Animorphs would put their stamp on it, which I don't even know. Have they made an Animorph book in a long, long time? Probably not, right? They're not still cooking.
That's a good question. Does K.A. Applegate or whoever even own the Animorphs IP anymore, or is it like Atari where some like French holding company has the Animorphs rights and just occasionally make speaker hats to make a little bit of money off of the Animorphs license? I'm not too sure, but yeah, I think that would be a good time. I'm not too burdened about what studio might be good at making it. I mean, Bloober Team is kind of riding their high right now after the Silent Hill 2 remake, so what the hell? Let's let them do a passion project. I'm sure a lot of that team is probably roughly my age or a little older. They have some good nostalgia for Animorphs, so I think that they could take a solid crack at it.
Awesome. I was thinking, what you could probably do to, pitch, the IP holder, just be like, the streamers are going to come, and you're going to make a lot of money.
It would hit Twitch hard.
Yeah, it would.
There's a lot of people that would be like, what? It's kind of like, is it Winnie the Pooh that entered the public domain a couple years ago, and now there's a bunch of Winnie the Pooh horror movies where he's like
I watched it.
Murder Bear.
Yeah, it's called Winnie the Pooh Blood and Honey. It's one of the worst horror movies I ever watched, and honestly, it's not even good camp. It's just a bad movie. I'll just be honest on that one. But hey, if you want to watch it, give it a shot. But there's that line, right? There's it's camp and fun, and then there's a line where it's just okay, they're trying, kind of, but this feels really bad. It wasn't even fun to watch, unfortunately. But yeah, that did happen. They actually have some coming out for Steamboat Willie as well. So. Mickey Mouse
that
theme.
entered the public domain too. So.
Yeah.
Okay, that makes sense. I was expecting. I thought Winnie the Pooh would be more like a Five Nights at Freddy type thing, where he shows up and he's spooky. But all right. But yeah, that's my Animorphs game that I want to see. Let me play it.
Awesome.
Cool.
I'll take the next one. The thing that I kept thinking about. Okay, so I've mentioned on here I'm a pest control guy. That's my job. I'm exterminator. I want to do a video game where it's imagine like Costume Quest or like a cartoony Halloween theme, and you are various bugs trying to get away from an exterminator that's trying to kill you. So it's kind of like, you're the little thing in the giant world type of thing. It'd be a 3D, probably like a 3D like stealth platformer. So you're gonna have to sneak around like this exterminator putting his traps out and his bait and his spray clouds will come in, and you can put like a little gas mask on your roach or whatever you're playing as at the time and stuff like that. So I just thought it'd be a really cute but fun idea.
It's like a haunted version of Tinykin.
Yeah.
In a weird way. Now, Josh, as the foremost expert on this podcast, I gotta know, what bug, in your opinion, is the most protagonist of all the bug? Like, what bug exemplifies the heroic traits that we come to expect from a protagonist?
I would say I say just like your humble carpenter ant. Like, I just feel like they're like maybe like even a reproductive carpenter ant, because they have wings and they can fly. So it's kind of like, let's go, guys, and you can kind of like do little hovers and stuff like across platforms. I think that would be pretty cool. Maybe there are different chapters where you help out like a cockroach colony or something, and you play as a cockroach, or you help out like fleas or something like that, and it could be cute. Obviously, there could be like a kind of comedic like backstory of the humans just slowly getting more and more infested in like the exterminators. Like, I don't know, I'm trying my best, and then right. Something like that. The name of the game is called Buggin' Out. BUGGIN' out. So yeah, Buggin' Out, and then it's going to be by the Tinykin devs probably. I think that would suit it really well. Yeah.
There we go. I would love to play that too. We're 2 for 2 on games I would enjoy.
I don't know. You kind of mentioned this, that there could be multiple bugs, but I envision that there's like 3 characters that you can swap between all the time, depending on the skill that you need. Like, that would be, so you could get different bugs in there, right?
Yeah.
You have an ant that can go certain places. Grasshopper. I don't know why you would have a grasshopper, because who's going after the?
Well, he's on the outside trying to help people help them get out of the house, right?
Yep.
Yeah,
that makes sense.
But there's so many like different tools like that I use in my job. Like, you have sprays, you got dusts, you got like bait that you apply, so you can like pretend to go to the bait, or like it's just a bunch of different things. But make it cute and cartoony, obviously, because if it was, or you could go the other way and make it super gross, and I don't think you want that. It's not fun. Trust me. I've seen it in real life. You don't want to experience that. So
it's a good one. My only extermination tip, folks, if you have an outdoor air conditioning, check the electrical box. All right. I had a lot of hornet nest hiding by.
Yikes.
They love that like hot current. Most bugs do, but yeah.
Okay, I suppose I'll kick off mine at the end here. So I was thinking about what's a genre of game that hasn't been tackled a lot but can also be scary. So I've been considering playing that new game that came out this year called Nightmare Kart. I don't know if you guys have seen that, but it's like the Bloodborne kart racer, you know?
Yep.
So as I was thinking about playing that, I'm like, there's not a lot of like truly spooky games that have cars in them. Of course, Twisted Metal, especially Twisted Metal Black, can get quite spooky. It's very dark and things like that, and just like the music is menacing. So what I came up with was a game where the whole objective, like, I haven't worked out like, what's the story and stuff like that, but the premise of the game is you're in a car, and there's a lot of games that have you chase someone else in a car, like Grand Theft Auto, but in this game you would always be getting chased by the bad guy. So you're basically going through a bunch of different levels where it's almost like a racing game, but there are jump scares involved and you are constantly being chased. There's always someone. So to me, it makes me think of like racing against a ghost in a racing game, right? You're racing against your own ghost, and there's always that like heart racing aspect of racing against a ghost because you're trying to beat that time, right? But in this, you're racing against like the computer, and your heart's racing because you're trying to beat the computer, but then on top of that, you're also getting scared as you're playing it. Yeah.
Super solid.
I'd be down for that. Are you envisioning that you're running from like an unknowable, horrible entity, or are you running from like bigger cars, like semis and stuff? Is this like a Stephen King's Maximum Overdrive situation?
Yeah, I mean, I hadn't thought that far into it. I think that could be very flexible depending on the team that was developing it. I think it would be, it is spooky to be chased by like a massive dump truck or like a semi, right? Like, because if that thing catches up to you, you're probably going to die, especially if you're in a small car. Of course, I kind of thought about, if you're playing like this and there's going to be some trial and error like there's with anything, you're probably going to get caught a couple times. You're going to have to figure out, maybe there's a shortcut down here that's going to shave off a couple seconds. So is the jump scariness going to wear off after a little bit? Probably, but I think it does in almost any horror game, depending on how many times you have to repeat things. So, that is what I was thinking about for this. I would like it to look fairly AAA to keep that scariness up, right? Like kind of a PS3 graphical.
Maybe like an Amnesia, the Dark Descent level graphics.
Yeah. Right. Yeah. So pretty good, so that it's realistic and believable. I didn't have a particular studio. Devolver can absolutely publish it though, for sure. Mm-hmm. And name of the game, I was thinking about this before talking to Josh a little bit. Like, oh man, I hadn't thought of that. I think that I would call it like Trailing or something like that.
Nice.
Somebody's following, right? But yeah, that's my little car chase game.
Awesome.
That's pretty sick. There's not a lot of spooky stuff in cars. I like that idea. I'm here for it.
Did you guys ever play Pacific Drive that came out? That came out this year, didn't it? Do you guys see anything about it? Isn't that the idea? It's just a car that you're like trying to get through spooky environments in, I think, at least partially.
Yeah. Yes, I think it is like you're driving and then like, I don't know if it's like monsters or aliens or something, but there's some creepy entity or something out there that is impacting you. If I'm being perfectly honest though, I was excited for that game, and then right before it came out I saw some like footage and some screenshots, and it was like very systems heavy. Like they were in a garage doing a lot of like customizing to the car and like attaching panels and like tweaking little stats and stuff, and I was like, oh, that is not what I thought this was going to be, and it kind of turned me off.
Yeah, it's like it has some rogue elements to it. Like you mess up your run, you have to like mess with the tech of the car and stuff. So yeah,
I think that it would be fun to have like your arcadey, like, oh, give me +1 engine or whatever, right? Like that. That's fun. But when you try to turn your spooky car thing into Grand Theft Auto, or not Grand Theft Auto, Gran Turismo, it's like, okay, come on now. That's a little bit over the top.
Yeah, I just get sleepy.
Yep.
Well, look forward to those games in 2042. I'm looking forward to seeing those and bringing them to the show eventually. Put them on a quest log. So, well, speaking of the quest log, we do this thing on the show where we're building a list of recommendations for you guys called the quest log. It's at, if you want to find it, it's IndieQuestPod.com. You'll see the list there. It's a Google Doc with hundreds of games on it at this point, and we're just going to keep adding to it. So, there's no, honestly, I want to say something real quick. Nobody's telling you guys that you have to play every single game on this list. I've seen that comment a few times. It's like, there's no way I can beat every single game on the quest log. And I'm like, that's not the point. It's just a giant list. It's like a giant repository of like amazing games that you should check out, right? So anyway, there's 2 segments to it. We got the main quest, which is a game that it's an easy recommendation. It's incredible. We might call it a certified banger around these parts. And we have a side quest, which is still a recommendation. There might be a caveat or two. It might be niche, but honestly, it's still an awesome game. You should check out. Every game we bring here is a recommendation. We don't bring any games we do not like to the show.
Yeah, we've already kind of pre-sifted, so if it comes up, it's worth your time.
Yeah,
no doubt.
I think I want to go first today. I never really do that. I'm just going to go ahead and straight up volunteer for it.
Brave.
That's kind of awesome, Josh, because I thought you were going to say, who wants to go first? And I was going to say, why don't you go first, Josh? Because I feel like it's been a while.
Yeah,
so I love that you volunteered.
All right, so I decided, I had a little DM exchange with Steve earlier in the week. I decided I'm bringing the game. I'm bringing Mouthwashing to the quest log today.
All right.
So
yes.
We've all obviously heard of it. Steve's played it. Seth, you've heard of it, or have you tried it at all yet?
I have not tried it, but I watched a good chunk of Steve playing it on Twitch. So
awesome. Well, it's a 2024 first-person psychological horror game made by Wrong Oregon and published by Critical Reflex. The game follows 5 crew members of the freighter Tulpar after a mysterious crash leaves them stranded in space. So it's like you're not sure what's going to happen. Is it cabin fever? Or is it like a spooky creature? Or what's going to happen on this ship? And the art style is really cool. It's like a early 2000s like PS1 style look to it. I think there's a trend now, right? Every game's trying to look like a PS1 game.
Yeah.
Like very blocky and polygonal with like kind of like fuzziness to it, like you're looking at it through a CRT. So the main premise of the game, or the main thing you're doing, is you are trying to experience a story. There's very light puzzles in the environment. The game is told through a first-person perspective. So you're kind of wandering the corridors of this ship. You'll usually have some direction. You'll talk to somebody and be like, oh, maybe you should go to the main cabin and or what's it called? The crew's the cockpit. I don't know why I couldn't think of the word cockpit.
Okay.
You got to go to the cockpit. Maybe you'll find something in there. Okay, and then you'll find like a scanner, and then you have a scanner that can scan codes, and there's like little simple puzzles where it's like find the code and enter the code. There's a lot of those in this game. As you're exploring, you're talking to the characters, you're kind of learning about this expedition that they were going on, and they're kind of like space truckers. They're like, it's basically a dark version of Futurama. You're trying to go from point A to point B, one planet to another, or maybe bringing some shipments to a different planet. Did they ever, you played this, Steve, did they ever say like a time period for this game? Like what year it's set in?
No, they didn't. I think the only thing they ever mentioned about time that I saw is just that the route that they're running is like a 9-month to a year-long route. So it's real long-haul trucking, space trucking.
Dude, the one question I had that I was thinking about as Steve was playing it, and now that you're talking about it, Josh, obviously you're going to probably get to this, but their cargo this go around is mouthwash, right? Or a variety of mouthwash. Does this team ever transport anything but that, or do they work for that company that you guys know of? Like, or are they just like freelance? They'll take whoever pays them.
They work for a company called Pony Express, and there's a lot of imagery of like this like creepy horse everywhere. Like you'll read posters, and like there's kind of like it gives that Five Nights at Freddy, like, is this horse like a real being, or is it in their head, or whatever. That's a little bit of the horror elements of this. But yeah, it seems like the Pony Express just takes contracts per job. So they don't really know what they're taking usually unless they're told. So that's kind of revealed later in a little bit into the story that it's mouthwash, and they're like, what the hell, So but yeah, there's a lot of really good, I would say this has a lot of good horror moments of like psychological horror. Like you don't know what is going on. They do a lot of time jumps. So you start off like it'll kind of have like a splash screen, and it'll say like it has a sound effect too, and it's like douche 2 days before the crash, and they'll like do time jumps back, and then you kind of learn a little bit about the story, and then you'll go after the crash, and then that story is continuing on, and then you just get some more backstory as you're playing. So it's like a lot of cut back to the past, and then sometimes you're not even sure when you are. You're like, what is this weird scenario I'm in? Like, this is just really crazy. Is this in somebody's head? This game has a lot of those moments where you're like, after you finish the credits and when you finish the story of it, you're like just thinking about it. You're like, okay, so this is what happened here. You're trying to piece it all together in your head. I love that type of thing.
Yeah, it feels like the type of game, honestly, that film critics would enjoy picking apart. And you might mention this, but to me, it feels a lot like a movie that you play, even more than most other walking sims. But yeah, there's a lot of scenes that you could look at and you could be like, okay, well, that definitely didn't really happen, but what does it represent to this character? And then there's other scenes where you're like, did that happen? Because it could have, but maybe it didn't play out exactly like that. And then there's other scenes where it's like, oh, that for sure happened. And all of those three can be horrifying in their own way.
Yeah, and there's a lot of really good, like, I'll just mention, there's a lot of good body horror stuff in this, like with Curly, which is the guy who like gets the most affected from the crash. He like gets the most damage. So he's like this like corpse with like, not a corpse. He's alive. He's a live body with a bunch of bandages and there's like one creepy eye poking out. So there's a lot of really cool imagery with that. And yeah, I agree with you, Steve. It's kind of like, what is this game, like 2.5 to 3 hours long, something like that, if that. And there's very low amount of friction. There's a couple of areas where you have to kind of like figure out, okay, what do I got to do? And then when you figure it out, you just got to execute it. It's nothing like super challenging. I feel like anybody who is interested in video games and has played a video game won't have any difficulty getting through the puzzles and figuring out what to do next, which is nice. Yeah. Besides that, you got really well written characters that actually have a lot of depth to them. So you start talking to them and they'll have like, oh yeah, there's a little bit of this backstory, and then you'll realize that some people have traumas from certain things that happened in the story that you later discover, and you're like, oh, then maybe that's why they're behaving that way. And then like you can kind of like start piecing all of the different characters together and then figuring out like, I'm trying to be very vague about it, but like trying to figure out like what's the next part of the story. Yeah, I don't know how to talk about the story without spoiling it, but let's just say it's very compelling. Yeah. The characters are really well written, and I was on the edge of my seat playing this.
Yeah, some of the best like character dialogue writing that I've seen in a game in a long time. And you're spot on that all the characters, like, they aren't just the one thing. It's not just like, this is the like gruff seasoned veteran guy who's been doing this his whole life. This is the medic girl that's kind of nervous. Like there's layers to all of them, and yeah, there's moments that you'll see happen to them in real time, and there's moments that you'll learn about that happened to them in the past that all just, they're not even necessarily like dramatic reveals in and of themselves. They just go to inform why they might be responding under these extreme circumstances in the way that they are.
Yeah, and I think with a lot of fiction, it's when they have characters that do seem like an archetype. You're like you said, the gruff guy, or like, oh, this is like the newbie. Oh, he's kind of ditzy newbie guy. That like they have those archetypes. But then when you start to like dive deeper into a character and you realize they're not just that dopey guy, or like you said, the nurse that's a little nervous. There's something underlying there that people are finding out. So I think that, like you said, the reveals aren't like, oh my God, they don't punch you in the face, but they're like, oh, okay, so that's why they're like that, or maybe she's timid for this reason, etc. I thought that was really well done. I think from a horror aspect of this game, it's not gonna like jump scare you per se every 2 seconds. It's more just super uneasy, which every single time you go to a new section or a new story beat, it's just a little bit, there's something off about all of this whole story. And it kind of gets you like tense when you're playing, which that's the best type of the horror for me. I don't mind a jump scare, but I'd prefer just feeling like I'm in an unknown area and I have no idea what's going to happen next, which this game definitely does.
As I was watching this game, I will just say, generally this graphical style doesn't lend itself super well to like realistic horror. But man, they did such a good job with making this like creepy as hell. Like this, I've mentioned last episode and before that I'm not a hugest fan of general horror games, right? This one would have been tough for me to play, I think. Like it's pretty, it's the body horror aspects. I don't know, like you said, Josh, you don't want to spoil anything, but there's certain parts of this that are like, oh boy. I don't know.
Yeah, and it is the sound effects are so good. Okay, so there's an element of the game. Okay, like I said, Curly's in that body cast. Basically, you have to give him pills, right? So you actually go up and you interact with him, and you have to open his mouth, and just the sound that the mouth makes is so wet and disgusting as you're giving the pills. It's just such a simple little thing, but it was so gross, and like there's a million of those little details in the game.
Yeah, and they linger on it, not inappropriately, like not just for the sake of it, but like you have to sit with that unpleasantness for a while, and it is hard. Yeah, like anyone that was watching my stream, every single time it happened, I was like recoiling away and like tempted to pull my headphones
Yeah.
out because I was
It's
like,
'cause, in your head.
I am not liking this.
Yeah, it like cuts the thing with that is like you do the pills and it like cuts to black and you just hear like wet noises. You're like, oh, it's like it leaves enough to the imagination to know how nasty it is, But so, yeah, it does that so well. There is a little bit of music in the game. I wouldn't say that's the highlight. I would say that the sound effects and just like the I think there's a couple segments with like some like background music, but it's really not the focus at all. It's like just the sounds of the ship, the sounds of the characters, and like just when you get into a tense moment and then there's like that build, the sounds build, and you're like, oh, what's gonna happen next? So they really do play with that a lot. But I wouldn't say there's like a song that sticks out for me or anything from this game.
No, if anything, the most striking one in my head was the one that played during the opening menu. There's like this kind of like beachy island theme that is paired with like bright visuals and some of that body horror all at once, and it gives you an immediate sense of just the weird that this game is going to go into, where you're like, I don't even know exactly how you want me to feel right now. Like you're sending me down 3 emotional paths at once.
Yeah, and it does that a lot. Like they do a lot of imagery with, like I said, CRTs. I think that the actual visual style of the PS1 graphics is really cool because like all the screens in the game are kind of like old school CRTs, like, or at least like, like there's a big wall inside of the like main area that if you look close enough, it kind of looks like a bunch of like CRTs next to each other to make a bigger image, or like an LED panel or something. But they play with like TV screens in really cool ways, which like I don't want to spoil too much of that, but like I feel like the aesthetic like with that kind of adds together into like just a really creative, like just overall look and idea, I guess.
Yeah. It's a very like there's a ton of variety to it, but it's a very cohesive package visually.
Yeah. So what I'll say about this game, I'm not going to go more in depth with it than this, I don't think, because like there is just a lot to discover here. This is one I would say if you have 3 hours and you the game's what, $15 or less. It's very cheap. And you want something that you have never seen in a game. I'll say this is one of the most unique horror games I've ever played. I don't think anything is, I can't directly compare it with stuff. I can be like, oh yeah, it's kind of like this game, but no, this is mouthwashing. There's going to be games actually made that are like in response to this, I feel like, going forward. I feel like this is one.
agree.
So it has a very cohesive artistic image, a very like a great package for 2 to 3 hours, and highly recommended. This is a main quest easily for me on this one. Highly recommended. I think this is going to be like a standout game for the year too, just in general. It's going to be one I look back fondly on. So any questions before we wrap up my pick today?
No, I'm just going to echo what you said, that it's quick enough to get through. And I'd also, if you can, I know not everyone's life supports it, but if you can, I think it's probably best if you just eat it in one big chunk. Yeah. Like if you just play through it start to finish, it flows so naturally from one scene to the next that the 2.5 hours goes by pretty fast.
Yeah. It's like you were saying, it's basically a movie experience. Give yourself 3 hours one evening, get a cozy beverage, get a blanket, turn all the lights off, and just get some spooks in you. And this would be perfect for you.
The question I have, Josh, that I just thought of, where would you put this on the old IndieQuest spooky meter?
Oh yeah, I forgot we did that last time. It really depends on. Honestly, it's probably like 8.5. Like it's high up there out of 10. Like maybe it's getting close to a 9.
I feel like that is telling something. The fact that you said there's not really any jump scares, the fact that it's still an 8 to a 9, that's quite telling of what this game does.
Yeah,
I think.
I'm not saying there's 0 jump scares. There is like one segment I can think of that had a couple of good jump scares in it, but it's more just you have no idea what's going on. Like, why are we here? What's going to happen? Are they going to survive this horrible situation? And I think that once it gets all resolved, it's not the cleanest of storylines, but that's perfect for a horror experience. And let's just say, like, it really depends on your horror level, like your tolerance, because like to me, this is like an 8.5, maybe 9. But if you don't like body horror at all, like I watched all 3 Terrifier movies, which is 90% horror movies, so I have a very high tolerance. If you have pretty low tolerance, I would say it's like a 9 probably.
The rare horror game or horror movie, I guess, that doesn't hang its hat on just trying to jump scare you. It's a 9 out of 10 because it's hard to stare at the screen the whole time, not because it's hard not to get a jolt of a little bit of fear.
Right.
So that was my pick. Who wants to go next?
I'll go next because I already know what's coming last, and I want to get my game out in the middle because I wheeled and dealed to get all the games I want to talk about onto the same episode, and I played people against each other using their own weaknesses. When I talked to Drachma in the DMs, I was like, hey man, you should probably bring this so I can bring this. I just played it straight. But when I was talking to Josh, I was, using my Minnesota nice, and I was like, well, if you want to bring this, you can. If I want to bring this, I will,
Josh, the people pleaser, it's pretty easy.
And here we are. I get the full run, the rare 3-game sweep. So I'll take the second game, which I'm pretty sure both of you know what it's going to be based on our conversations. And that is Crow Country. So another 2024 release came out May 9th. This game was developed and published by a studio called SFB Games, which is a developer that's put out a lot of stuff in the past. I think their most famous game is probably Tangle Tower, which came out before this, which some folks might recognize. Or, extremely weirdly, they're also the developer of Snipper Clips, the Nintendo-published, papercraft co-op puzzle platformer.
That's crazy. I just played that this year, Snipper Clips, randomly. We wanted something quick co-op and played through that, so that's crazy. I didn't know that.
Yeah, I fact checked it like 3 times because I was like, that must not be right. It must be a different studio but a similar name. But it's like, nope, it's SFB Games, and these could not be more polar opposites. So that is that's a studio with range, let me tell you. But Crow Country is a 3D isometric survival horror game. And you can play it on pretty much everything. It's on Xbox Series consoles, it's on PC, it's on PS4 and PS5, and it's on Switch. So everything other than the older Xboxes you can play it on, which makes sense. And it is very much a survival horror game in this sort of modern run of... this is overly reductive, but like retro throwback survival horror games. There's a lot of these games that are specifically calling back to like the PS1 Resident Evils, Silent Hills, and like using that foundation at least as a starting point, if not as like full-blown inspiration. And Crow Country is one of those. I would say they actually went a slightly different direction, which is it's more visually, to me, it reads more like Nintendo 64 or Sega Saturn than PlayStation 1, but it is of that era in that the visuals are kind of blurry and lower res and somewhat pixelated, but still 3D. And the characters have like this very rounded, almost like Lego Duplo kind of shaping to them. Like they're made out of spheres. Like finally the Bulls 3D horror game that we've been waiting for. You 3DO fans got your wish. But cool idea. This was actually part of what inspired my horror pick at the top, because I feel like in some ways I'm sort of plugging and playing the location here. But you play as a character, a young girl named Mara. She's a special agent, and she is exploring Crow Country, the titular Crow Country, which is an amusement park that has somewhat recently been shuttered. So it's not an abandoned amusement park in the sense that like it's been years since anything's happened here, but it was abruptly shut down. I forget, weeks or maybe a couple months prior to the start of this game. And you're exploring specifically to try to find the sort of head honcho founder, Edward Crow. So Edward Crow Country. So you're exploring these various amusement park locations. It's an amusement park in the sense of not like so much rides, but more experiences. You think of like a Universal or something where there's like themed areas. Yeah. Here's the Harry Potter section. Here's the Transformers section. It's like that, but with more generic themes. So there's here's the haunted house area. Here's kind of like the magical fantasy forest area. Here's the mermaids underwater area, that type of thing. And there are the occasional rides here and there, but it's more like attractions, events, things that you would go to see and explore.
Carnival games, right? There's some carnival game type stuff. Yeah.
Yep, very much so. So Mara enters in, and because I told you it was a survival horror game, very quickly you're going to run into some, we'll just call them shambling creatures, that you could read them as zombies. I will neither confirm nor deny it. It's up to you to play the game to figure out what they are, but they're spooky. And so you need to take them out, and that's where it becomes a more traditional horror game in some senses, because you're going to do the things that you expect to do in a horror game, which is you're going to press a button to sort of steady yourself and raise your weapon, and then you're going to aim and firing at different body parts. So at like a leg versus a head versus an arm will have different effects on the enemies. Headshots will do more damage. Leg shots can either like knock them down or impact their ability to approach you, things like that. You also deal more damage the closer an enemy is to you. So there's a little bit of incentive to sort of like fire in the last possible moment to conserve ammo, which is interesting. I don't actually know if that's a system in other survival horror games. That's one of those things that I could see. Maybe Resident Evil has always done that, and I've just never stopped and thought about it, and that's where they got it from.
I kind of like that they're outward about that, because I feel like in a lot of these kinds of games, you're guessing. Like, it seems like that did more damage than what it's done before, and you're just kind of like, but they just tell you, hey, this is what you should do if you want to maximize your damage. So that's nice.
Yeah, and it gets rid of some of that ambiguity there, where in this game, it is very possible, especially if you're firing at a longer range, you can put like a full clip into a single normal enemy and not take them down or barely take them down. Not that enemies are all bullet sponges, but there is a noticeable difference between letting them get close and keeping them far away, which is, adds some tension, which I think is fun. When you're aiming, it's a little strange, at least it was to me. It plays like... So the game itself is sort of like a isometric kind of running around survival horror game, but the actual aiming feels more like over-the-shoulder Resident Evil 4 style, where once you like put yourself into a stance, you can move the joystick and it will move the cursor around on the enemy's body. So you can kind of like manipulate where you're going to shoot them in the same way you would in Resident Evil 4. But because it's isometric, that feels like it feels a little strange, like it's a little bit unintuitive, or feels a little, you could say clumsy, but I think it's intentional. It just feels a little hard to navigate in a way that is probably entirely by design, so that you'll miss shots and panic, especially if an enemy is too close to you. But it does on occasion feel, the way I was describing it to people is it feels like when you play a light gun shooter with a controller instead of a light gun. There's just like that
delay.
Yeah, that delay, that strangeness.
You wish you
like
had
shuffling.
Yeah, you wish you had a mouse rather than a joystick to pinpoint. I will say purely from being a viewer of this game, it is one of the most unique ways that anyone has ever asked you to shoot a gun in a game. Like it's very interesting. So regardless of whether it's great or terrible, it is very unique. So it's kind of cool,
Yeah, it's very rare in a game to go to fire your first shot at an enemy and to be like, oh,
yeah, right.
Well, this is different. You kind of take it for granted. I'm like, oh yeah, I'm just gonna, I'm gonna press a button and I'm probably gonna auto aim onto the enemy and I'm just gonna unload and hope I have enough ammo. No, it's like there's much more. There's both depth and clumsiness in a way that must have been very hard to balance, but they did it right. Now I said you can pump a whole clip into an enemy, and that it might make you think like, oh man, does that mean that everything's bullet spongy or that you're going to be out of resources? Not necessarily. One, because this, like many horror games, is the type of game that encourages you to pick your battles. You're not designed to kill every enemy you see all the time. And two, the game is really actually quite kind. Well, it's kind of kind and punishing, two sides of the same coin, because you can never truly run out of ammo. There's not like a finite amount of ammo drops in the entire game. Once you have like used up all your current ammo and like found, I guess, the nearby predetermined ammo locations, the game will spawn, still very sparingly, but it will spawn ammo in random spots on the ground. You'll run down a hallway you've been down 4 times, and now there'll be an ammo box on the ground. You'll be like, there's no way I missed that. The game definitely put that there so that I don't run into a situation where I just can't progress. Right. Now that is, I said it's a two-sided coin, because the game will also spawn randomly in areas traps and obstacles that impede your progress. So like a bear trap on the ground, or a chandelier that falls on you and you run underneath it. And so the game is playing with your cockiness, right? Because this is, as is the case in many survival horror games, is a very dense map. And so you're getting keys and items, and you're running back and forth between areas. You're getting halfway through one area, getting an item that opens a door in this other area. You're running through familiar territory to get there, and then you're headed back. So you'll, especially in the back half of the game, you'll be navigating places you're very familiar with. You'll kind of know the routes to dodge enemies and stuff. But the game will sneak in and spawn a little bear trap there. So you'll be running, and suddenly, wham, you take like half of your health's worth of damage, or maybe a little less than that. But you're punished for getting complacent and assuming that you know better. And so you really do have to, even in areas you already know, keep an eye out. Now, it doesn't mean you have to like move at a plodding pace, and it actually doesn't drag down the pacing of the game at all. It just was an interesting way, I thought, to force me to pay attention, because I really was autopiloting sometimes. I'd be like, all right, I know what to do here. I'm going to go. But no, you gotta keep your eyes open.
I feel like it's an interesting addition to the tried and true survival horror, because traditionally survival horror is like, I'm going to give you 6 bullets, and if you can't figure out how to take down what you need with these 6 bullets, then you're kind of screwed. This is more like, we're going to give you plenty of resources to be able to get through what you need to. We're just going to take your health away and make it more difficult if you're not paying attention, which to me, it makes sense for this type of game. I'm assuming, games have probably done that in the past, but this is the first time that I can think of something like this happening in one of these games. So,
yep. Yeah, it was actually a lot of fun. A lot of the things like the aiming or that system at first glance, and maybe even at first encounter in the game, feel a little annoying. And then as you play more, you're like, this is actually a strength of this game. Like this is a well-intentioned system. So good job. Also, I forgot to mention, but in the same way that you'll find ammo drops, the same thing is true of like health kits and antidotes and stuff. So if you are low on health and you've used all your healing items, there's a chance the game will spawn an item, so you won't just be permanently running around with critical health the whole time. So I'm not going to like discuss any details of the story, but you will encounter a couple other characters as you're exploring around this environment. You'll have, multiple encounters with different ones. They kind of have different storylines that intersect, very much structurally like a Silent Hill game, where you can imagine that there's going to be 4 or 5 characters. You're going to run into each of them a couple of times, and they have their own motivations, their own storylines. You can make certain decisions at different times. So, like, I'll give an early-ish example. You meet a character, have kind of an innocent conversation with them, and then a little bit later, you'll meet a character who's a police officer looking for the character you just met. And you have the opportunity to be like, yeah, I saw them. They're here. Or I don't know who you're talking about. Sorry. And so I don't know how much that impacts the narrative overall, but it certainly gave me pause. So right. Even if it's just sleight of hand, I was like, okay, interesting. Because it's never positioned as like, oh, this is the good route. This is the Jedi and this is the Sith choice. It's like, I didn't even consider lying to you until I was given the choice. Should I?
I was like,
would you offer?
You play this on PlayStation? Was my question?
I did. Yep.
Yeah. So is there like a trophy, like do this question or do this answer, or do you know? Like, do you have to do?
There's not one. No. Okay, you don't have to do multiple playthroughs for that. So. Thankfully, I could just kind of go with the flow. And I will say that the narrative overall, I thought was like surprisingly well told. Some survival horror stories, I think, can kind of go off the rails, or the stakes they try to twist things in the back third in a way where I'm like, this ultimately was like a very, I don't want to say grounded, but they're like very tangible. Like you could follow the major beats of the story. There were interesting reveals, and it tells a story that feels like completely earnest from the first moment you played to the last moment you played. Like, yes, I could have been following along this whole time. I could have predicted these things, and this is like a very reasonable set of explanations and outcomes based on what has happened here, which is pretty cool.
Since you're talking story, Steve, and I know you're not going to get into it, but something I noticed while you were playing. We've talked before that none of us particularly enjoy overly chatty games. I noticed that in this game there seemed to me as a viewer to be a lot of signposting, where it's like, here's another thing, and it seems like you're always walking up and reading more. Did that seem too much to you, or was it enough, or was it necessary? I mean, I know some of it was like story and some of it was like gameplay things, but it just seemed like every new room you walked into there was something new to read all the time. So that's just something I noticed.
Yeah, it didn't weigh on me too much, but you are definitely right. There is a lot of notes and things to read in the game. I think the main culprit of that, which you kind of mentioned, is posted around the amusement park. There are what seem to be pages torn out of like an in-universe gaming magazine, and there's like 30 of them, and they all give you a tip about the game. So like one of the early ones you find tells you that you deal more damage to enemies when they're closer to you, and they have all sorts of like, here's the controls, but also more like subtle, like try using this item in this way, or did you know that this is how healing kits work? Like just little gameplay suggestions.
Yeah, it's the world's first tunic-like. That's what you're saying, right?
I wish. All right. This isn't quite a tunic. This is more like a Death's Door kind of game. Right? I would put it at Death's Door.
Okay.
Oh boy.
But yeah, it wasn't too bad, and I think maybe it plays a little, or it goes down a little smoother when you're the one controlling things versus kind of like, half watching with one earbud in while you talk to your wife, because I was more invested in the story and the notes I was reading, so the pacing didn't feel quite as bad. But
okay, that's good.
It is worth mentioning though that like talking about like the signposting and things like that, this is a pretty easy game as far as survival horror standards. I think I died like one or two times, and it was always because I was being stubborn, and I definitely didn't need to. Like, there were deaths where I had 8 healing items in my inventory. I was just trying to optimize a little too hard. And if I had just been the type of guy that is willing to use his mega elixirs before the final boss, I would have been more than fine. So I don't think anyone's going to, if you've played any like Resident Evil survival horrors, I don't think you're going to have any problem getting through this. So much so that, like many of the survival horror games we play, at the end they give you like a ranking of how well you did. And I got the S ranking my first playthrough without really thinking about it too much. I don't know what all the conditions for that are, but it was not bad, and it didn't take me out of anything. I was just playing the way I would.
Was that a detraction at all for you? Would you prefer it to be more difficult, like the classic survival horror?
I don't think so, because the game is actually fairly meaty of a game. Like, I want to say that my full experience was like 7 or so hours, which is pretty solid for, I think, this type of game. And especially considering that this is a pretty small map in terms of like in-game units of space. Like, once you have gotten every key in the game and, access to all areas, if you were to try to like run from the southwest to the northeast corner of the map, it would take, I don't know, like 45 seconds after you remove loads. Like, it is pretty snappy. So just very dense. It's imagine like a mini Animal Well in terms of map density. No wasted space in
that's good.
Crow Country.
Cool.
Nice.
The exploration is really fun for a couple reasons. 1, obviously that randomized stuff keeps it fresh. 2, the game hides what they call secrets, which are like just optional puzzles, or like paying extra close attention to weird stuff in an environment or in an area. And the secrets that you find will give you upgrades for your weapons, or in some cases, like ammunition for some of the most powerful weapons. And so every now and again, you'll come across those secrets. And then late game, you actually get the ability to see all the secrets that exist on the map and what ones you found and what ones you haven't. They don't tell you what to do to find the secrets, but you at least know, like, oh, I need to go to this room.
Yep.
And it was really fun hunting all of those down. The puzzles are pretty easy, but they're all, I think, really good. Like, by survival horror puzzle standards, they're never obtuse, they're never weird. They're always very much, you can digest them with the information in front of you and solve them. And some of them are pretty fun to solve. They do some interesting stuff that I haven't seen really in many other horror games. So, yeah, very much a fun experience the whole way through. Never really any major pacing issues or anything like that. So, trying to think anything else that I need to mention. Sound design's pretty great. It had a lot of ambient, kind of spooky sound effects. The monsters sound interesting and cool. It has, like, I don't want to oversell this because this is not like a toy game, but there's a little bit of like an intentional teeniness to some of the gunshot sounds and things like that make it, that makes it like a little bit more playful. It just feels like it matches the art style in a way that makes sense. Like, you kind of like a boing if you miss a shot or something like that.
Yeah, to me, it almost reminded me of like looking down at like a diorama or something.
Yeah,
right. Like you can't see you can't see all the rooms at the same time. But if you blew it up even a little bit further and like hollowed out the walls, you can kind of see what they were going for there, which is cool.
Yeah. Yep. That's a good way of describing it, and yeah, it's just a really good match of tone to gameplay. Plus, it's got very cozy, very comfortable save areas, so don't worry, people. I know you love your save room music. You're going to be more than pleased with Crow Country. Nothing to fear.
I was going to ask, what's your spook factor rating?
Yeah.
For the
IndieQuest? Good question. I would give it. I would probably give it like maybe a 6. Like, it's not too scary. Helped in large part, I think, by it having that like art style that pulls back things a little bit, but there are definitely some real creepy monster designs, and you do have some limited visibility in some areas, so there will be times where enemies can kind of like come around a corner in a way you weren't expecting, because the areas, like I mentioned, are kind of dense. You go blind around a corner, there might be an enemy now literally right in your face that you just weren't ready for. So there's definitely a couple of like, oh my. But it's more the type of game that you're getting the experience of playing a scary game more than you are getting scared while playing a game, which is a subtle distinction, but I think makes sense to most people. Any other questions?
I think I mentioned this, and this is like just a sidebar thing, but May 9th, 2024 was a heck of a day for games, because Steve didn't mention it, but that's the exact same day the Animal Well came out too. So it's just wild. Yes. I know there are other games that came out that day. I can't think of them off the top of my head.
Is
but
it
there were
1000
several.
X Resist? Wasn't that day?
Oh, it was around
Resist?
that time. It was
it was May 9th. Yep, I just looked it up. Yeah, so
crazy day.
Man, that is brutal. So if anything, maybe that buried Crow Country a little bit, or it may not have been on some folks who are listening to this radar. So if you're in the mood for something spooky, by the time this episode launches, you still have enough time to get through it in October. So I definitely say check it out, which will bring me around to, I guess, my closing thoughts and where I'm going to place it. Honestly, this is another main quest for me. I didn't really have any major problems with this one. I thought it was a really good time. I would put it in my upper echelon of survival horror stuff. It's kind of just like it's like a solid workhorse, sort of just like B+ banger. Like if we were doing like tier lists, if we were making the ultimate IndieQuest tier list, and we were doing the thing where we put games into tiers and then we were arranging them in those tiers, I'd maybe put it slightly below Mouthwashing, but it would still be in the same tier, just for different reasons.
Yeah.
So yeah, please go check out Crow Country.
I think my final question, now that you have placed it on the quest log, Steve, you compared it to, other indie games and obviously our quest log, but how would you compare it to, we kind of touched on this, but directly to the RE1, to Silent Hill? Like if you played this in 2000, how would you feel? Does it compare favorably?
I think it does. If you went back in time and you played it alongside those, I think it would be held up pretty similarly with enough time to age for different reasons. It would be, I think, seen as the slightly more lighthearted survival horror, like the alternative to those games. Right. It's not quite taking itself, I don't even want to say as seriously, because it's not like the game is joking around, but it's just by the nature of its aesthetic and some of the design choices, it's a little more almost arcadey. Mm-hmm. But I still think that it would stand up to those. Although at the same time, it does in a very intangible quality way that if you were holding me, in a court of law to have to explain this, I couldn't do it. But it does feel distinctly indie while you're playing it. Like you get the sense like this is a passion project by a small-ish team of people, not by, 100 people trying to optimize for the most intense gore possible.
Right. Cool. Okay. Well, I think that will lead right into my game and the final game of this episode. As Steve mentioned, he has already played this game, but I do want to say that while he is sometimes a trendsetter, I pointed this one out to Steve. I think that you mentioned, Steve, that you had seen it prior to me saying something to you, but the reason I said something to Steve was because I read a couple comments on the Steam page, the store page for Steam, that said things about one of Steve's favorite games. And I was like, hey, did you know this? I'm planning on playing this, but did you know this? And I think within 10 minutes, you had already bought it and were starting to play it that same night.
Yeah, it was immediate. He sent me the link and I was like, purchase, download, went on the living room, put it on the Steam Deck and started going. Like there was no downtime at all.
So without further ado, I will be bringing Grunn to IndieQuest today. That is spelled Grunn. Looks like Grunn, but I did want to do research prior to bringing it today. It is pronounced, or it should be pronounced Grunn, because I believe that's how the Dutch pronounce it. Could ask Guido to double check, but I'm pretty sure that's accurate.
He'll tell us in the Polymedia
yes,
either way.
For sure. So Grunn was released October 4th, 2024. It was developed by Tom van den Bogaert, also developed by Sock Pop, and any listeners might recognize Sock Pop as the developer or maybe publisher at that time. I can't remember exactly. For Leap Year. Steve brought Leap Year, and I think both myself and Josh then played Leap Year. I kind of want to mention how I discovered this game. So I had played Leap Year in July. I played it on my birthday and got it for my birthday square in Polykill Bingo. And then, cool, awesome game. Loved it. Moved on. And like Steam does sometimes, it gives you recommendations based on previous games that you've played. So I think one of those things popped up that was like, hey, Sock Pop, they're coming out, one of the new releases or a release that's coming soon for Sock Pop, Grunn. So then I clicked on it and then I watched the video. Anybody out there that has not seen the trailer for this game, do yourself a favor and watch the minute trailer for this game on Steam, because you're going to be like, what is this game? Before I go into the overview of what this game is, as of now, it is only on Steam, but I'm hopeful that it comes to other consoles in the future. It certainly would play fine on other consoles. I suppose you could definitely play this game keyboard and mouse. I did not. I just played it with a controller, and it controlled as you would think it would. What this game is, it is and you can correct me on this, Steve, this is a genre soup if there ever was one.
Yeah.
First person, multi-dimension, time loop, roguelite, gardening puzzle game.
Sounds right to me.
I would maybe add the word mystery in there, but otherwise, yeah,
Mystery.
all of those genres are simultaneously correct all at once.
Yeah, if you're the trailer,
a
it's
vibe.
just a normal gardening game, guys. That's all it is.
Yeah, it's just normal gardening. No big deal.
And any game that calls itself a normal anything, or any person, anything in the world that calls itself a normal anything, is probably not a normal anything, right? So, yes, it labels itself as a normal gardening game, and all you really see in the trailers is either walking around these different landscapes that you can walk around, or generally you have some hedge trimmers in your hands and you're trimming grass and bushes, right? So in general, that is what this game is trying to tell you. Like, it's a gardening game. You're going to garden, but there is much more to it than just that. So what does it look like? It is a 3D first-person game. To me, and Josh, back me up here, you've seen some screenshots. It looks so much like Minecraft to me in certain ways.
I would say it's like the mood of it, maybe. Yeah, it's not blocky, but like maybe the
No, it is blocky to a certain extent, but the grass isn't just blocks. That's actual grass coming out of the ground, but it's very square. There's not a whole lot of rounded edges in this game, right? So
it has a chunky voxely vibe to it.
Yes.
Yes.
Yes. It also has like a weird CRT filter. It's not scan lines, but it makes you feel like you're playing on it. It's got this graininess and fuzziness to it all the time, which is absolutely a choice. I loved it. I thought it looked really good. They could remove that filter and it would still be good, but it gives it this vibe that you're playing a game in the late 90s or early 2000s. And I really appreciated that.
You're playing it on like a TV that is slightly like mistuned in terms of the picture. It's like got like a little bit of like chromatic aberration, a little bit of blur, and just it's just a little bit odd, but it makes sense. But it's odd.
That's a good way to describe it. I didn't know how to describe what it's doing. I called it an ultraviolet hue. I have no idea. It's very strange. Music. Extremely, I wouldn't say extremely. It is eerie. For the most part, it's not going for, especially in the initial garden area, it's not going for like, ooh, super spooky. But it just always kind of has this eeriness to it. And there's also a lot of atmospheric sounds, birds chirping, and just like, as you're clipping grass and hedges, there's that satisfying clipping sound when you're moving through the world. So if you're like really into the gardening, like a Harvest Moon type of thing, and you want like a first person version of that, I think that this does scratch that itch. I will say that listen to the rest of this before you go right into it, because it might not, it's not just a normal gardening game. It isn't. I remember seeing a review on Steam that said, I wanted to just garden. And for the most part, it allowed me to, but I absolutely definitely had to do stuff that wasn't only gardening to get what I needed, right? So I will just preface it with that. If you just want to garden, you can kind of do that, but you will have to do other things, which is why things that are October adjacent, right? So that's why it's here. There are NPCs. I believe roughly 18 of them based on different checklists that you get. And you can talk to all of them. This was one of the more frustrating aspects about Grunn to me. Like 16 of the 18 NPCs that you can talk to do this like grumbling sound, like blah, 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 blah. Very villager-esque from Minecraft. I know I'm going to do a lot of Minecraft comparing. You can't understand what they say. And you're like, okay, that's fine. I've played plenty of games that are just like blah, 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 blah. And then it'll give me subtitles to tell me what they say. And the majority of them are just say, you can't understand what this person said. So it's like, it's fine. Like it's totally fine. And at the end, I always expected that eventually I would be able to tell what they say to me. I never was able to do so. I don't know if you were able to, Steve, or not.
And I never found a way. I was actually at some point wondering, I guess it's still possible. Maybe there's stuff I didn't do that would make this the case. I was wondering if it would become like an eco situation where, like, after you like beat the game, then they let you understand stuff so you can get like story more directly that you otherwise were sort of guessing at. But my entire experience, I put like 10 hours into the game, and my entire experience was just they just stared at me with their kind of wobbly faces and made a sound I couldn't decipher, and I moved on.
I will say, in this game's, like a feather in this game's hat, regardless of the fact that I could not talk to any of them, none of them spoke back to me, I still clicked on every single NPC whenever I saw them. It didn't matter that they had nothing valuable to say. I still hoped they would. And in general, I was disappointed. But it was like a kind of delightful disappointment, not like, oh, this sucks disappointment.
Yeah.
On to the story. You can't really get into it too much, like especially the gritty details. All I'll say is you wake up, not really even wake up. Your character is just there on the bus when you start a game, so you're on this bus. You can stand up, you make your way off this bus, and all you have to do, you can't go back, like you can't go turn around and try to wedge your way between the bus. From what I could tell, you can't sit back down on the bus. You have to move forward, and you can grab a key and then walk to this gate, and you cross this bridge, and you are in a garden. The bus leaves, so no more bus, at least not for now. And all you can do is kind of walk around, and then eventually you find out there's some signs that you can't read, unlike the NPCs, that basically says, hey, you're here to garden. So there are some tools that you'll have to use. The hedge trimmers are sitting right over there in the shed. The other tools aren't here right now. You're going to have to go find them. That's it. That's all the game tells you. And the rest of it is kind of drip fed to you throughout the rest of the game. And I don't really want to spoil a whole lot because so much of what you discover throughout the game is very aha moments. So it's not worth talking about. If any of this, it is not a normal gardening game, unlike what it says. So if that interests you, then absolutely jump into it. The story, to me, maybe not the best story of all time, but still very good and kept me wanting to play it. I don't know if you have anything to add to that, Steve.
No, that's right. And I also wouldn't want to spoil things for people. I would just say, yeah, if you're the type of person who enjoys being dropped into a game and figuring out why you're playing it, you'll have a good time with this one. Also, don't read too much into this for people, but at a mechanical level, if you enjoy the gameplay loop of Outer Wilds, you will appreciate Grunn for sure.
Yeah, I forgot to mention that at the top. I said, hey, Steve, you might like this game because the comments on Steam, basically all of them say this is a lot like Outer Wilds. At least certain aspects of it are a lot like Outer Wilds, which I think will lead us very neatly into how this game plays. So, like Outer Wilds, there is a time aspect. As soon as you stand up on the bus, even before you stand up on the bus, I think there's a black screen that says Saturday. So you know that you're there on a specific day. You get up off that bus, you walk into the garden. Now all of a sudden, once you're in the garden, you see a military time up in the top right corner of the screen. And if you walk around for, 20 seconds, you'll notice that it goes from 8 o'clock to 8:15 to 8:30 to 8:45. It is constantly counting, as it is in Outer Wilds, as it is in, Majora's Mask, something like that, right? It is constantly counting. You are on a time crunch, which for anybody out there that's like, well, I'm never playing this game because of that, I hate that. I get it. I am not a huge fan of that, of being on this time limit all the time. But all I will say is once you get going, once you have played this game for like half an hour or 45 minutes, that time is not going to frustrate you.
Not at all.
No,
yeah, not at all.
So don't be like, oh man, I'm going to be so, it's going to suck so much to try to keep within those bounds. And I just hate, it stresses me out to have a time limit placed upon me. It's not stressful. don't worry about it, especially if you're not achievement hunting. I will say right at the top, there is an achievement for doing a certain thing in 10 minutes in this game. As of right now, I'm not entirely sure how I'm going to do that. I would like to do that eventually. I can see it being pretty tough, but you don't have to do anything within that specific time limit. Yes, you have to do a lot of things within those time bounds, but in general, you have enough time to do what you need to do on each of those days. And if you at the very bare minimum, you are going to gain knowledge so that on the next run, you will know what to do.
Yeah, and certain events will happen at certain times, so you may have to be in a particular place at a certain time to witness some event or to do something or whatever it may be. And if you miss it, you'll just do it next time because, as you probably were going to mention, you will play this game multiple times.
Yes, there are 11 endings in this game, and I'm kind of going to skip around as we go here, depending on what comes to mind on my notes. But there are 11 endings. One of my absolute favorite things about Grunn, like a top tier thing to me, is that death is just another ending. I love that about this game. So many games, it feels so bad to die, especially when you spent 20 minutes, 40 minutes, whatever it was, on a run. You die, and it's like, I don't feel like I accomplished anything. Yeah, I learned a couple things as I went, but it just sucks. Like, I hate that I just died. In Grunn, every ending is just, almost all of them are another death. Like, it doesn't feel bad to die. It makes me feel like, I just got another ending. And that's awesome. As long as you don't repeat deaths, so do the same thing again that was, I learned I shouldn't have done that thing, so I'm not going to do that thing again, then you won't feel bad about it. Honestly, out of those 11 endings, there were maybe only 2 playthroughs where I did not achieve an additional ending throughout my playtime, which feels so good. It really does.
Yep.
It feels like you're not wasting time.
You're also probably not gonna die due to like lack of skill. It's usually once you've died, you understand what you did, and that won't happen again unless you willingly choose to let it happen. And the deaths are so interesting as ending to the point where at the tail end of the game, I was like thinking to myself, how have I not died yet? Like how could I die that I avoided that I maybe want to go see if this is an ending?
There is a specific, I'm not going to give it away, but there's a specific thing that you encounter. When I first encountered it, I was like, well, I don't feel like I'm all that far along in this playthrough. I've learned a couple things. I don't need to continue on with what I'm currently doing. I'm just going to beeline to that thing because I bet it will kill me. And so I just want that ending. I just want to pop it. And there was another time, it happens a lot where it's like, it almost feels good to die in this game because it just gives you another finish. So
I just want to say one thing real quick. If you like that loop where there are new things that you discover and then you die in some way, I would suggest playing Outer Wilds. If you like that loop, like that's like 30 hours of that or more, So
This has got me very interested based on the Outer Wilds comparisons to play that game, I will say. I've been a little, all jokes aside, I've joked with Steve about Outer Wilds before, but it's a little intimidating because I've heard certain things about Outer Wilds.
It is a lot,
But after having played this game, I'm
it's like one of those games where it's like there's so much to it that it's going to be like I need to take out the notebook and start writing down all the little notes about every planet, and it can be a lot. But if you're willing to invest the time, it's really worth it. So I'm just saying.
Yeah.
So that's
100%
a wonderful segue, Josh, because I want to ask Steve this question about Grunn as well. I took pretty sparse notes. So if there are people out there that are huge note takers, there is a thing that you can collect in this game, and they're called Polaroids. So they are basically pictures that would come out of a Polaroid camera, and they give you very very subtle hints at certain points. All it really is it gives you a screenshot of an area in the game. Sometimes it's actually pretty zoomed in, so you're not even entirely sure. You have to like take very small context clues. Where have I seen that? And it will sometimes give you a day of the week, so either Saturday or Sunday, since you're only there for 2 days. I might have failed to mention that. You're only able to do this for, like, it's not even 48 hours because you have to sleep at midnight, so it's just Saturday and Sunday from 8 o'clock in the morning until midnight. So it might say Saturday that you can go here and do this thing, or it might say a specific time of day that you can go there and do that thing. And that's it. Like, that's all it really tells you. But I feel like with just the Polaroids, I had gotten enough information that I never felt all that compelled to write a lot of things down. I don't know if that was different for you or not, Steve. Did you have a list of notes?
I had a decent number of notes, but almost all of them were me being worried that I wouldn't remember something. So the Polaroids will tell you something, some place of interest to you, or some whatever it may be. But sometimes there's kind of a series that led to that Polaroid, and sometimes I would take notes like A to B to C to D to let myself know, even though this Polaroid isn't telling me that, this is kind of the start of that I need to remember, because there are some situations where you might want to do multiple things, and knowing which ones happen where and when was just easier for me to make sure that I would definitely do them in time.
Yeah. So the Polaroids do naturally, for each progression, they do naturally go in order as long as you found them. So it's like 2A, 2B, 2C, and you have to do that in order to inevitably get the thing that the Polaroid is sending you to, which, another thing we should mention, there are like a variety of items that you can find in this game, and generally Polaroids are pointing you in the right direction for those items. And those items are then used in different places based on other Polaroids that will make a thing happen, right? So everything in this game is trying to lead you to another new ending, and that's kind of the whole point. Get to eventually to the good ending. And so you follow these Polaroids as you play and discover different endings, and as you do, then you gain information from dying to this thing for the next run. So I said it's a roguelite. You literally, it's not very much a roguelite in the, I guess, the way that we think of it now, in like the more new sense of, hey, maybe there's some meta progression. I'm going to get stats or whatever, so I'm going to be stronger on the next run. This is a roguelite purely based on knowledge. So every run is exactly the same. Nothing changes about run to run. Other than Polaroids. You get to keep all your Polaroids. So from run to run, you get to whatever Polaroids you collected last time. I don't have to go and collect those again, which is probably why I didn't feel the need to take so many notes. But as soon as you discover, maybe a shortcut that you didn't know before, now that's something you can do at 8 o'clock in the morning the second you walk into the garden, rather than having to root around until noon until you finally figured it out, which is always going to help you on the next run. I think Steve and I were talking in DMs about some of the brilliance of this game, right? From run to run, from my first run, I was fumbling around. I was trimming some bushes. I was trimming the grass. Didn't really know what to do. Versus my 11th run, I was beelining it through these different areas, all the way to where I needed to go, where I know I needed to go. And it is a Halloween or horror based game, so there are like some jump scares. I would say if you're like super against jump scares, then maybe be a little bit wary of this game. But in general, they're not bad at all, and they're not actually scary. It's just like in conjunction of like the sound effect that comes on and the face that you see somewhere, right? It's not that big of a deal. But it's funny because on my 11th playthrough, I know exactly where the jump scares are coming, and I'm just like, yeah, running by the guy.
You're charging towards them. You don't even care, right?
Nice.
I will try to not always compare to Outer Wilds, but there's a couple of really good touch points for people that have played Outer Wilds. One, the Polaroids serve a function very similar to the ship log in your ship, that like web that showed you all the mysteries you haven't found. And what's cool about the Polaroids is they tell you what ones you've solved and also what ones you've solved this run. So you can see what ones you
Yes.
figured out and what ones you've already done, which is a really good, fast reference. And then to the point of like how scary this game is, I would compare this game to Outer Wilds. What I would actually really compare this to, like what this game is the closest to of any video game out there, is Echoes of the Eye, the Outer Wilds DLC. In structure and in like the total level of scariness, this is probably even less scary than Echoes of the Eye.
Okay.
So if you played the DLC and you're familiar with that and you're comfortable with that and you enjoyed that loop, that's Grunn.
Yeah. I think the thing I have not touched on yet is more detail on the actual gardening, which is like it's like yes, on the surface, that's why it calls itself a normal gardening game. But it's like the gardening is almost the least cool thing about this game, so I kind of forget to mention it because after you garden for the first couple runs, there's so many things that you just don't need to garden for anymore. But yes, you get some hedge trimmers, you can trim the grass, you can trim the bushes, and there are certainly endings where you need to actually do that in the different areas. So you have your garden that you start in, you have a church, and you have a park. And you have to figure out and find ways to get to those other areas. But each of them have a different setup. And I would say, I don't know what your experience with this was, Steve, but it's a very relaxing, especially if you're not worried about anything else. It's super relaxing to just walk around and basically mow the grass and trim the bushes. And eventually you'll get a couple other items where you can water flowers and you can kind of knock out these molehills. And it especially when you look at an area at 0% completion, because it tells you with the time how complete that area is, until 100% completion, you take like a before and after shot. It's like, I did that. That feels good.
It really does look like you tended the area.
Yes.
Like, it looks a lot nicer. And like you are going to spend time gardening. It does not take like an insignificant amount of time. You will spend time gardening in this game. You will have runs where you are primarily gardening.
Yes.
And it's not like, don't think that you walk into a garden and then suddenly a bunch of weird stuff happens and the gardening gets thrown out the window. Like, no, you're gardening. Like, every single run you will grab those shears and you will be cutting grass. Like, you can't avoid the gardening. So
you can't avoid the gardening. Yes. What I will say is then leaning back to what Grunn is below that surface, eventually you would get to a point where it's like, I actually don't need to obtain that tool at all on this run.
Yep.
I can just bypass that and save time to go do something else. And that, to me, is where the brilliance of this game comes out. Is I need to, before I even start this run, either write it down or plan in my head, which Polaroids do I need to look at? What do I need to do first? Kind of set up that checklist, go through, bang, bang, bang. I can ignore that tool or that item altogether because I don't need that for what I need to do. That is what makes Grunn such a good game.
Yep.
Anything else to add, Steve, before I put it on the quest log?
In terms of the game itself, no. You can watch a trailer, you can vibe check it, and you'll know pretty much if it's your type of thing. It is extremely cool. I'll also say it's like really affordable. It's like $10 or something like that, $12. So
$12.99. Yep.
Yeah, pretty low barrier of entry there. And like I said, I put about 8 to 10 hours into it, and there's still like achievements and stuff I could go do. Like it's a pretty meaty game.
Yes. I did want to mention, we mentioned there's items. There is also currency. That's a pretty massive part of this game. At first I thought, I'm just picking up these coins. It's another collectible. Cool. Turns out that you can actually utilize that currency in a variety of ways. And one of the other great things about this game is several of its items can be obtained in multiple different ways. So depending on which route you're deciding to go, you can get this item if you want to go this way. You can also get that same item if you want to go this way, which is really, really awesome. I love that about this game. I don't want to spout too much and spoil things. But Josh, do you have anything else before I put it on there?
No, I heard the loose pitch on Twitter. I feel like it was on Twitter somewhere. Maybe it was the Steam page, but it was this is Outer Wilds with gardening and some spooky vibes. I'm like, all right, I'm sold. And then this conversation just makes me want to play it more. I'll probably boot it up this week sometime.
Awesome. All right. Verdict. I mean, it's probably pretty apparent. This is an easy main quest. I mean, this is
no doubt.
To me, this is like 2024 is a heck of a year. That's all I'm gonna say.
Yeah.
I agree.
This will probably be mentioned in a couple months when we start to go through the juiciest that 2024 had to offer. It, and honestly, going into it, I was like, I'm sure I'll enjoy it. Based on things I read, I'm sure Steve will also enjoy it and probably enjoy it more. But I'm here to say that I'm not entirely sure that Steve did enjoy it more than me. I love this game.
We might have to argue later in the year and find out.
Like, this is absolutely, I will not sit here and say it's not a Steve game, because it is. So, Steve has said before, and, we have an episode coming up that might be a little bit of a curation of things that we enjoy and to our taste. But this is a Steve game, for sure. I'm not going to say it's not. But I loved it. I truly did, and I think that that's what puts it on the main quest easily, because this is not my kind of game generally, and I could not get enough of this game. I would shut this game down and go do other things and still be thinking about it.
That's awesome.
And thinking, what can I do the next time? And that is how you know you have a really good game on your hands. So, yeah, Grunn, main quest,
sweet,
awesome.
Certified banger.
So we got 3 games on the main quest from 2024 this episode, which is awesome. Like you guys were saying, this crazy year. I mean, we got some variety last time. It was, not all 2024 last time. So at least they got a good time period there worth. I don't know. It was so easy this time to just pick 3 bangers. Like I think that with the 3 games were, Mouthwashing, and then we had Crow Country and Grunn. All 3 of these are just like kind of like there's some conversations happening about them, like people are talking about them, and it's like it would be almost like hard to not bring those 3 games this year. I feel like, because they're just so good, Yeah.
Also, interestingly, again, 3 horror games or horror adjacent games, 3 2024 games, all 3 of them doing very different things in terms of, when you say it's a horror game, that means 3 unique things for each of these games. So still a huge variety across those 3 picks.
Speaking of that, I forgot to put Grunn on the spooky meter.
There you go.
Oh, yeah.
Honestly, to me, almost like a 4 or 5.
Yeah. It's like a 2 or a 3 with occasional moments of like 5 or 6.
The surface, it is actually not spooky, and then it kind of throws some spookiness at you, but the spookiness that it throws at you is almost purely like jump scares. You're not entirely sure what's going on. When you really look at the thing that's happening, it's not actually that spooky.
Right.
That's it.
And they're being playful about it. They're doing like the piano crash sound when the jump scare happens. Like they know what they're doing.
Yeah.
Is it okay, this is a question for Steve. Is it creepier or more creepy? Well, creepier or less creepy than Dredge? From like the game you brought last year.
Ooh, I would say Dredge was a little disappointing in terms of the creepiness. Grunn is at least consistently like eerie. It's just like
it's a little weird.
It's just a weird vibe. It's a weird vibe that is horror or scary adjacent. I don't know.
I don't think that this is necessarily a spoiler. I will say there's a certain time of day that doesn't matter where you're at. Like this like weird red, like it got me every time. Like where this like red huey ghostly thing pops up and just scares you no matter where you are in the world. And I'm like, God, what? Please stop that. Please. Like everything else I knew when it was coming. But this thing, it just got me every single time. So it absolutely, I would say that this is horror enough for October.
For sure. So, yep.
All right. Well, we had 3 awesome games brought to the quest log today. We discussed them, I think, pretty thoroughly here. So it's time for the plugs. Let's wrap it up today. You can find the show on Twitter, and I'm gonna probably make a Blue Sky as well pretty soon, or something else. But it's at IndieQuest Pod. You can find the quest log IndieQuestPod.com, and you can send us emails. We tend to read any email that's not not offensive, please, Max, stop sending me offensive emails. All right. If you send us emails, it's IndieQuestPod@gmail.com. Steve, where can they find you on the internet?
Twitch and Twitter as Blinkoom, Blink-O-O-M. Coming out on the stream. I streamed 2 of the 3 games that we talked about on this episode, actually.
Awesome.
You can find me, Captain Drachma.
I gave you nothing there. I dogged you. I just left him hanging like, maybe no one cares where they can find Seth. No, where can they find you, buddy?
You can find me at Captain Drachma on Twitter and, of course, on the Polymedia Discord. Best place on the internet. If you want to get into that Discord, head on over to Patreon and search up Polymedia. Jump into what I believe is the lowest tier. That should get you in the Discord. And come hang out. Chat some scary, spooky games with us. Tell us what we missed this year. Josh, where can they find you?
And you can find me at Frantic Society. When you said the lowest tier, I thought you were going to say the lowest tier of scum and villainy on the internet, the Polymedia Discord or something. Anyway, well, that'll do it for our show today. I'll go ahead and close this out today. Thank you so much, everybody, for checking out the 2 spooky episodes this year. Always a good time to, focus on a genre in October time. It's such a good time. So next time on your normal Indie Game Podcast, we'll see you then.
See ya.
Peace.